From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So our next group of presenters has been helping others work better by developing tools, platforms, and methods for making data collections more accessible. Elizabeth Lorang has been working with the Chronicling America dataset, demonstrating the potential for collections to hold not just answers, but also methods for further research returns for all. An associate professor of humanities and a humanities librarian at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, she is also a faculty fellow in the Center for Digital Research in the Humanities at UNL. Her research areas include digital humanities and digital scholarship, American poetry, and 19th century American newspapers. She is the co-PI of Image Analysis for Archival Discovery, an NEH-funded project that seeks to leverage the information potential of digital images for discovery in digitized collections. Next, we'll hear from Ricky Punzalan, an assistant professor of archives and digital curation at the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland. His research includes understanding the relationship of archives and collective memory, the dynamics of digitization and decision-making in collaborative settings, and the uses and users of digitized archival images. He also examines virtual reunification, a strategy to provide integrated access to dispersed ethnographic archival images online, which he will speak about today. Closing this session is Mark Bouslog, a developer with Zooniverse.org, the world's largest platform for people-powered research. Mark focuses on developing user interfaces that accomplish research previously considered impossible. Powered by citizen science and coffee, his recent work includes assisting with the relaunch of Notes from Nature, a project to transcribe and digitize museum specimen labels. Let's get to work and welcome Liz Lorang.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers and our hosts for the invitation and the opportunity to share my team's work with all of you, as well as the opportunity to hear about the projects that you all are working on and then the conversations that all of us can have over the course of the day. The project I'll be talking about today has been possible only because of the contributions of a research team, past and present. So while I'm here presenting on our work today, I want to be sure to acknowledge that research team. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge my colleague at UNL, Professor Lin Kiat-So from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, as well as my former undergraduate student, Grace Thomas, who contributed early on to this project in key ways. I couldn't be more delighted that Grace is now on the staff of the Library of Congress as a data specialist. She's been here for about a month now, and also that she's able to be here today. So my presentation today is in 3 parts. First, a statement of a problem or a challenge that I think we face in working with digital collections and in developing digital collections. The second part is a discussion of an experiment of sorts that my research team and I are working on in order to attempt to address that challenge in some way. And then the third part is a look at the longer term and sort of where we're headed next. So the first part then is this challenge. And the fundamental challenge that we're working to address is that for all the wealth of digitized primary materials now available, finding materials of relevance in these collections remains difficult for all but the most routine use cases. And this challenge is documented most recently by Green and Courtney in 2015, and in their surveys and interviews of scholars working with digital collections of primary materials, the authors found that one of the most prominent challenges cited by respondents in their use of digital collections was the inability to search effectively through the collection materials. And these findings align with those of some other studies over the last couple of years that similarly show the difficulty of finding items of interest in digital collections, and also the degree to which more fine-grained level of descriptive detail can be significant to successfully analyzing corpora. So my sense is that this difficulty in finding materials of relevance arises in part from one reason is the level and degree of description of items in collections. But the difficulty of finding materials of relevance is also due to the ways in which platforms and interfaces shape engagement with and circumscribe access to materials, including the primacy of text-based searching and barriers to bulk access. Even when there's an API, for most people, that's still going to be a barrier to access of some sort. So addressing this challenge of connecting people with items of interest is going to require efforts on multiple and creative fronts. In response to this challenge, my team, the Image Analysis for Archival Discovery team, is focusing on the digital images and collections rather than on machine-readable text. Our work starts from two beliefs and takes up two questions at this point. The first belief is that locating relevant materials in digital collections is already often a difficult endeavor and will become increasingly so as more content is digitized. And second, that we leverage little of the information potential of the millions of images that we're creating as we digitize the cultural record. So we're asking two questions. What more can we do with those millions of images that represent the digitized cultural record? And what kinds of discovery might serious attention to these digital images yield? Now, both academic and industry sectors are increasingly interested in image-based methods for identification and discovery. One significant area of development is in image recognition and image searching of primarily visual works, including artwork and contemporary mass photography, such as photos posted to various online platforms. There is an increasing array of computer vision software designed for such applications that are in use in academia and industry. The emphasis, however, is very much on images of artwork or images of contemporary photography or images of items that we understand first and foremost to be visual works. So as my team engages with these questions, we're interested in turning the focus to image analysis of textual materials, so looking at the digital images of textual materials. To return to the title of my presentation, we're interested in what happens when we look at text as image. So I have a series of 4 slides that attempt, in a very crude and unsophisticated fashion, to illustrate the differences between where we are with computer vision in contemporary photography versus computer vision for the purposes of archival description and discovery. So the first example is an image of a sloth that I uploaded to Google image search just to see what I would get. And not only were the search results pretty highly matched to the image, but there was also a sense, like Google knew that what I was interested in not only was a sloth, but a cute sloth. And for me, this is like the best case scenario for image search. I didn't have to wade through lots of other kinds of sloths. I got right to the cute sloths. So if we contrast that with an image of a 19th century letter, I went through the similar process, and the results, I think, are a little more varied. The images look kind of like the image that I presented, but the sense of what I'm interested in at this point is being intuited as items that are handwritten. And we can start to see some real potential for that, to be able, within a collection, to pull out the items that are handwritten. But what if I'm interested in certain types of handwritten items that haven't been described? Okay, here's an example quickly of a newspaper. In this case, again, the recognition was pretty good, I think in large part due to the fact that we have so many digitized newspapers and digitized from microfilm. But I want to look at this fourth example, which is a poem that I've cropped from a newspaper image. And now I wasn't expecting to find lots of other cropped newspaper poems, probably because I'm one of the few people who actually does that. So there's not a huge corpus of them at this point. But there starts to be a pretty wide gulf here between what is in my image and the sorts of things that I would think would be of interest and what is being suggested as possible results. First and foremost, this is recognized by the Google image search at this point as me being interested in handwriting, which is very clearly not the case here. And also, while I wasn't expecting to find poems in newspapers returned as the result, I was sort of thinking maybe there would be some printed poems, right? So again, sort of the range and the gulf of the effectiveness of these sorts of searches thus far, from something like contemporary photography to wanting to find specific types of items within digitized collections. There is, though, an emerging body of work in the arts and humanities interested in the visual signals or visual analytics of textual materials. Recently, the visual page research team has analyzed visual features of books of poetry in order to explore visual meaning in those print pages. And in a similar vein, the Shapes viewer at BloodAxe, the Poetics of the Archive, allows users to explore its archive by drawing the shape of a poem, and the search then returns poems of similar shapes. Then BloodAxe demonstrates the potential of thinking about textual materials visually, particularly the visual as part of the meaning making of the text. Both of these projects, however, begin with known pre-selected items from relatively small corpora, so they're starting when we already know what we have here is an item of interest. So my team and I are extending visual analysis approaches for the purposes of identification and discovery. And this takes us to part 2 of my presentation, sort of the experiment that we're currently working on. So our work now looks at whether we can identify poetic content in historic newspapers based only on visual signals. We're using the Chronicling America collection of newspapers as our corpus, and given a newspaper page image from Chronicling America, we want to be able to say whether or not the page features any poetic content, and ultimately where the poetic content is on the page. So we've been ambitious in our goal, seeking to identify as little poetic content as a single couplet quoted in a news article, to finding pages with single or even multiple full-length poems. To do this work, we've created a machine learning classifier to distinguish between images from newspapers that feature poetic content and those that do not. This required determining the visual qualities that we believe are important to identifying or distinguishing poetic content, translating those visual qualities into measurable features, developing algorithms to measure then those features, assembling a set of sample images where we knew the ground truth, whether or not the image contained poetic content or not, compiling the feature measurements for both sets of images, and feeding those values along with the image's status into an artificial neural network to help the system learn what values tend to signal poetic content, and then finally testing the classifier on unlabeled images. We published early results of this work in DLib magazine last summer, and at the classifier training stage, we achieved precision and recall of just under 91% and 80%, where precision measures how many times we were correct whenever we predicted an image contained poetic content, and recall was measuring how many times we correctly identified poem images out of all poem images. Now, these numbers dropped when we tested the classifier to just under 75% and 62%, but they were nonetheless encouraging enough that we decided to undertake a larger case study. We did not want to overfit our approach for such a small set of page images that we had used for this initial test. And so at this point, we know we have more work to do, but we didn't want that work to reflect only this very small sample. So we've recently undertaken work to look at a much larger set of images. Specifically, we moved to a case study of Chronicling America's newspaper pages from 1836 to 1840. For this work, we have 2 goals. One is to scale the system, and the second is to test and analyze the accuracy of the classifier on a much larger set of data. We focused on the 5-year period 1836 to 1840 because at the time we started it, it represented the first 5 years worth of content in Chronicling America, and we knew that we could expect to find a significant amount of poetic content in newspapers from this period. The first step in the process was to develop a script for batch retrieving images from Chronicling America, and we now have a script that allows us to retrieve images based on, we're working primarily with date parameters at this point, but in the future we'll likely add some additional parameters as well, such as by newspaper or by state. For the current study, we retrieved nearly 22,000 images, what was at that time all page images from 1836 to 1840, but Chronicling America is growing at a really tremendous rate now, so our numbers are, so we're now already only working with a subset of those 5 years. Getting the page images was the most straightforward part, though it was not without some complication. Importantly, the system we've developed for measuring and evaluating features, though, doesn't actually process the entire pages at once. Instead, we process the full page image as overlapping image snippets and look to see whether any of those image snippets from the page contain poetic content or features signaling poetic content. So in the earlier stage, we created those image snippets manually, but we now needed an automated approach to this process. We need to be sure that the image snippets themselves are good in order to increase the chance that we will have accurate classifications. So we developed a process for evaluating all of the page images to see if they could be effectively segmented, checked each page image against several set of rules, and this was something we did automatically, and then broke each of the pages that passed into the subsequent snippets. So approximately 8,800 page images passed the segmentation process and yielded 509,000 image snippets. And each of these snippets then undergoes a series of processes represented by those images on the screen, and we capture the images at 3 different stages, and those are what we use to measure the features and do the feature extraction. So this work is still very much in process, and while we don't have big results just yet, hopefully we will by the end of October, we do know a few things at this point. First is that we've learned about both historic newspaper pages as well as about the duplicative processes that have brought them to us in chronicling America. A variety of factors affect whether or not a page can be segmented. These include contrast ratios, the presence of a number of illustrations, or the presence of text or images spanning multiple columns, and noise in the microfilmed or digitized image. Second is that since we know that we want to know at a high level of accuracy how good our classifier is, so we need to know the ground truth of the page images and the snippets. We could have done some sampling, but at this stage, this is very much a research project, and we want to know at a very accurate level how accurate the classifier is. This has meant that I have manually classified those 8,800 pages so that we can check the machine classification. According to the manual classification, so the work that I did, of those 8,800 pages that passed segmentation, 1,678 of them contain poetic content, while just over 7,000 do not. But according to our machine learning classification, again, which is classifying at the snippet level, but we can extract the page metrics from that. So the machine learning classification suggested that there were 4,440 pages containing poetic content, which of course is much higher than my classification. And even more than that, when I compared my classification with the machine learning classification, we overlapped only on 785 pages. So we know that we have work to do here, and where we're headed next is to do, so we need to then be able to look at the snippet level, which means I'm evaluating those 90,000 snippets to determine their classification, so we can really do a detailed analysis on where my classification and the machine's classification agree and where they differ, and then start pulling some things out from that. So this is why it slowed down a little bit at this stage, but once we have the manual classification and the machine classification, we'll begin the work of deriving detailed statistics and thinking about the ways in which we can further improve the classifier. And so that might be techniques to make sure that we're not quite as aggressive in returning snippets as true, so we can look for see only if concurrent snippets are classified as true, for example. And then we'll have to see, though, how accurate our features that we think are important for signaling poetic content turn out to be. So we'll be turning to an understanding of what we get from our classifier results. We will be analyzing the data sets, doing some written analysis, and doing an early stage look at how our classifications for newspaper content in languages other than English compare with our classifications of newspapers in English. Since the 1836 to 1840 set includes some newspapers in Spanish, we can start testing this idea that an image-based approach for textual materials should be language agnostic. Okay, so in the longer term then, and I'll hear both, so when I created these slides last week, I felt compelled to talk in fairly broad terms. But only yesterday I learned that our research team has received IMLS research grant funding to continue our work, and we have a surer course for that work. We're embarking on a new partnership with colleagues at the University of Virginia, with whom we seek to extend our software across a more diverse range of digitized newspapers and textual forms, and to assess the broader potential of image analysis as a methodology for image classification, identification, discovery, and retrieval in digital libraries. Given the visual distinctiveness in poetry and the immediate potential for scholarly impact, we seek to refine our methods on poetic content, but now also to cross a number of boundaries, including geographic, temporal, and linguistic. And I can say more about the work that we're interested in doing in the course of that grant. But our hope is that this work ultimately will affect how we develop digital collections, both pre-release and post-release of the collection. We seek to develop new strategies and workflows for librarians and archivists to identify and classify materials and to facilitate researchers' abilities to pose new questions of digitized collections. Ultimately, we hope this work might also materialize in more creative interfaces, such as that on the Blood Axe archive, that allow users to query collections in ways beyond the text-based search or browsing conventional organizational schemes, such as date and publication. Before we can get to those interfaces, however, we both need to create the underlying data as well as broaden our sense of what's possible with the collections that we build. And this will require us to work with both text and image, as well as to see text as image. Thank you.
Okay, good. Hello, everybody. I really appreciate being here. I'm one of those people who were basically a librarian through and through. I have a bachelor in library science, so meaning at 18 years old, I decided to become a librarian. So being at the Library of Congress and, speaking here is, I'm from the Philippines, so it's such a big deal to be here. So if there's anyone watching, yeah, I'm here. And it's awesome. Okay, enough about me. Let's talk about virtual reunification, which is one of my passions. First, I'd like to premise this conversation by talking about, that digitization has become a fundamental responsibility. I mean, when I say this, occasionally I'll get some nasty looks from other people because they don't appreciate this idea. But, we have to wake up. This is, institutions are expected to be doing digitization. I know that there are resource disparities, but, I teach Introduction to Archives, and I'm now expected to teach my students, putting digitization as part of archival practice. So this is part of our realities right now as cultural heritage institutions. With digitization, we facilitate discovery. In fact, there are studies that indicate that having a digital surrogate will help institutions discover the actual artifact, will also bring people to use collections more broadly. We are redefining relationships with our patrons by providing digital products. We are rethinking our work as heritage institutions, and it also redefines what it means to perform library archives and museum work. And it's also, this conversation of convergence and collaboration has been happening even before digitization, but I think digitization is one way to ensure that institutions are truly collaborating by sharing resources and expertise. So the way we've handled dispersed collections in the archival community in the past is that first we acknowledge them in our finding aids, saying, this collection is also found in 5 other institutions. Sometimes we're comprehensive, sometimes we're not. Another thing at the theoretical level, we've tried to expand notions of provenance, ownership, and what it means to have records in our custodies. And finally, we are using technical standards and tools in reconnecting and linking collections together. Here's one quote from 2001 by Jeanette Bastian. She says, standards such as the EAT now offer the potential of virtually reuniting fragmented collections and relating distributed collections through the online linking of finding aids. And she's talking about this in the context of the records of the US Virgin Islands. So move to more contemporary times, we hear the term virtual reunification, which is a very short definition would be allowing dispersed collections to be brought together. It's a highly collaborative endeavor. It will involve multiple institutions, multiple scholars in various disciplines, and multiple expertise within cultural heritage work. It harnesses the affordances of the digital. The problem with many dispersed collections is that it's almost entirely impossible to reunite them in their physical formats because, one, you encounter geographic limitations. Things are in far places. Physically, sometimes materials are in different formats that are quite challenging to be brought together in their physical forms. And they say that finally, with digital surrogates, we can bring things together. It also facilitates cultural diplomacy. In some projects, virtual reunification projects, in Europe, for instance, it involves multiple institutional or national institutions. Here's some examples of virtual reunification projects there's many out there, but these are some. My favorite is the Walt Whitman Archive, and I'm sure it's familiar to many. It brings the work of one person, and also from various institutions, and trying to do multiple ways of engaging with the material. Reunification, or bringing together the whole of collections, has its deep roots in the analog world, specifically in the humanities. So, in art history, there's such a thing as catalog raisonné, or in music, complete works, or in literature, you have critical or scholarly editions, and in history, we have, or which is more related to archival work, historical editions. So, you have historians going to different repositories, trying to collect all writings of Thomas Jefferson, for instance. So, there's a long scholarly trajectory in bringing together collections. What I've noticed about virtual reunification is that there's lack of attention to photographic materials. There are projects out there looking at image processing and pattern recognition. There are projects that would exhibit photographs, for instance, but they're not at a particular scale where you have them from all over the place, different institutions, multiple stakeholders, and just truly bringing them and doing scholarly work with those materials. It's also touted as a way to do repatriation, meaning returning collections to source communities by digital means. But there's no clear explanation of what it really truly means to return something that's digital. More on success, but less on barriers. When I read the literature on this subject, people are celebratory, saying, yay, we did it. It's difficult. Congratulations to us because we've done it. But actually, we learn from barriers, from projects that tell us that these are the problems that we've encountered, so that when we do it again, we know things to expect. And also, it's unclear about interinstitutional collaboration. When 10 institutions are involved, and one of those is, let's say, a historical society in one county versus the Smithsonian, there's an imbalance in terms of resources and prestige in that project. So there's a lot to be done and discussed in this area. And in the world of digital repatriation, anthropologists and people who study digital repatriation have acknowledged that there's a problem around the notion of returning copies of artifacts to Native American communities. Is it really return? Is it really repatriation if you're providing copies, no matter how good the resolution might be? But at the same time, not all communities want the actual artifacts to be returned to them. That many communities are quite happy with digital surrogates that they can use in the classrooms and in their communities. So there's really not one solution to this issue. Where does the return happen, and for whom is it done? Is it for the institution, is it for the community, or is it for the scholar facilitating the return? So my project looked at the photographs taken in the Philippines in the early 1900s by a colonial administrator that was assigned in the Philippines, Dean Worcester. He was a zoologist, and because of his interest in zoology, he started going around the Philippines to document the different indigenous groups of the country, and in the process managed to amass a cache of photographic materials. Here are some examples of the photos. And here's more. The rationale is that for us to be able to manage this new territory called the Philippines, we need to understand its people. And more importantly, we need to understand their resources so we can trade. That was the whole premise around the ethnographic surveys that he did in the early 1900s. Now, the photographs of Worcester currently are in more than 10 institutions, but I looked at 10 institutions for this study. There's an effort to consolidate them since the 1970s by doing a union catalog of sort for where they are located. There's a research demand on these photographs, and it's in various stages of digitization, and there's some funding available for this, and yet reunification is not happening. So I said this is probably an ideal case to study and examine, in a context where something is likely to happen, yet it's not happening. What's stopping it from happening? That was my particular question at that time. So I went to 10 institutions that collected these photographs. Two of those are, I would classify as natural history museum. 4 are anthropology and archaeological museums. 2 are archival institutions or archives, and 2 are special collections. You will see, and I'll get back to this, that in these multiple institutions, the photos are of different formats and different types of state or stages in terms of digitization. But so you go back to the idea of, if you want to bring something together that's dispersed, who decides on behalf of the communities when only institutions are talking? And how do you display indigenous images when, if you want to produce something scholarly? Another problem that I've seen is that, there are many dimensions to dispersion. When you say I'm reunifying something that's dispersed, so are you referring to, the physical distance that they're scattered in various places? Are you talking about temporal sort of dispersion because they were dispersed at different moments in time? Provenential, I'm using provenance from the archival sense in terms of chain of custody and ownership to these materials, or is it material? The challenge is material. So here's one visualization, elementary one that I created for myself of, to show you some notion of dispersion that's geographic. It's in multiple places. It could also be provenential. So in one institution, the material is categorized as a collection by Frederick Worcester, the son of the photographer who then donated it to the American Museum of Natural History. And then later, the negatives were transferred to the University of Michigan Museum of Anthropology. So, provenance as well is quite dispersed. Sometimes it doesn't just go in one direction. So it's also temporal. They were given to these various institutions at different moments in time. So there's that, the earliest collection that I found was at the National Anthropological Archives. And also materials. Sometimes the photograph would be in a scrapbook. Sometimes it's a lantern slide. If you compare two scrapbooks, images are, put in different chronological order or different parts of the same, or two different scrapbooks. So there's a lot of researchers are interested in the meaning around the changing of this, chronological representation of the photographs. And also among institutions that I've interviewed, they seem to have this notion of, so we can't show these photographs to everybody. And so we have to make sure that we are more responsible around, who gets to see the image. So as far as these institutions are concerned, they have to see it first because they need to work on the collection. And then the source communities, of course, the different indigenous groups that would take ownership of these images, and then researchers and scholars, and then maybe the Filipino immigrant communities who are living in the US, and then the general public, the last. So it's a different notion of access. I know that many information professionals are very much in love with universal, unfiltered, unhindered access, but it's just not the case for ethnographic collections with ties to indigenous communities. So finally, I'm leaving you with three questions. The first is, what does it mean to assemble the whole? As I said earlier, there are many dimensions to dispersion. Does it mean getting all of those dimensions together in one representational kind of digital project? What is the object of reunification? Sometimes we actually care about relationships, fixing relationships with communities. Is that what we want? That ultimately the outcome is that we have good relationships with communities, that the material recombination or assembly of these things are a way towards that. Another is, if reunification is the solution, what really is the problem? Is this sometimes, I hear of availability of technology, that it will solve things, that it will do a lot of things for us. But is this a solution in search of a problem? So thank you very much.
This one. Excellent. Are you duplicating, or can you split the screen by chance? Ah, sorry about that. You'd think a web developer would know how to. Thank you. All right, perfect. Well, on a personal level, I may be the most surprising and unlikely presenter today, as not long ago, I sat in a library to escape the beautiful chaos of my then one-year-old daughter. I was combing through programming books to build an app of my own. I had recently resigned from a 10-year career as an accountant and auditor to pursue a passion for web development. Shortly thereafter, I started my current dream job as a web developer for Zooniverse.org. So it's fitting I introduce you to a surprising tool that will unlock the data of your collections in unlikely ways you may not imagine, the Zooniverse. The Zooniverse is the world's largest, most popular platform for people-powered research. And I'm one of 26 Zooniverse team members, many also with unorthodox backgrounds, including PhDs in astronomy, the humanities, ecology, and philosophy. There's an amazing team of developers and data scientists, as well as education and outreach ambassadors. Today, I'll introduce you to the Zooniverse through our diverse projects, then focus on transcription projects, and give you a brief overview of our project builder. It all started with Galaxy Zoo in 2007. Like many scientists, and likely many here today, 2 astronomers had more data than they could process. They had over 1 million galaxies to classify before they could even use the data to ask the interesting questions about our universe. One of them remarkably classified 50,000 galaxies over a month, classifying morning, day, and night, but would likely go insane or spend the rest of their life classifying to complete the data set. Now, the pattern recognition required for the initial classifying humans excel at, while computers yet do not. Their solution was to harness the power of crowdsourcing with Galaxy Zoo. They implored the general public to go and review the images and classify them as spiral or elliptical, with a tutorial if needed, and the results were incredible. There were 50 million classifications during its first year alone, with over 150,000 people contributing. Eventually, it was determined that the crowdsourced consensus was as good as classifications provided by professional astronomers, showing that the crowd gets it right. The research team has since published over 40 peer-reviewed publications, including some where volunteers are listed as co-authors. These are just regular, everyday volunteers. Galaxy Zoo accomplished research otherwise thought impossible. And it gets more exciting. In the upper left here, we have legendary guitarist for Queen, Brian May. He's also a PhD astronomer and an avid Galaxy Zoo participant. And he inspired others, like Hanny van Arkel there in the upper right. She's a teacher in the Netherlands. She classified the warped spiral galaxy in the center image towards the top, but asked what's the object below it. The researchers looked into her question, and it turns out it's a galaxy-sized gas cloud driven by a black hole in the neighboring galaxy that recently shifted from active to quiet. Scientists knew of it, but had never captured the phenomenon. Hanny was the first person in history to witness it, and it was aptly named after her. Which illustrates that the more people you engage in your project, the more likely someone will make an amazing serendipitous discovery. So each project has a forum that we call Talk. Talk is where volunteers can communicate with each other, as well as with the researchers or experts. In this project, the first discussion is for specific images. The next is general questions, and there's specific discussions that are unique to this project. Now, Talk is where we often see these serendipitous discoveries like Hanny's Voorwerp. And a key to a successful project is that the research team engages with its volunteers through Talk. This is our current landing page of projects, and since 2007, the Zooniverse has expanded to over 45 active projects with several hundred researchers that have led to over 100 peer-reviewed publications. The Galaxy Zoo papers alone have had thousands of citations and reuse of the data. Galaxy Zoo in its story encapsulates 3 important points I'd like to emphasize. First, engagement with volunteers will equate to the success of a project. Secondly, crowdsourcing is both about classifications and serendipitous discoveries. And third, crowdsourcing leads to accurate and reliable results. Science Gossip is a transcription project that bridges the citizen scientists of the Victorian period with the citizen scientists of today. Before computers and cameras, citizen scientists had to draw what they saw. But those drawings have been locked away in the pages of those Victorian periodicals until today, through Science Gossip, volunteers can help classify those drawings, unlocking the origins of citizen science. What may have taken a diligent historian over 10 years, volunteers were able to accomplish in 1. It's accomplishing research otherwise thought impractical. One volunteer found the left image, an illustration by Mabel Rhodes on the anatomy of the rat flea, and asked in talk if it was the first female contributor. And her question inspired the community. They discovered numerous women engravers and illustrators, including many previously uncredited. One volunteer's question brought the collection to life in an amazing and unexpected way. Penguin Watch is one of my personal favorites. You get to spy on penguins for science. You tag penguins in remote regions to help us understand their lives, the environment, and the effects of climate change. A contest for Penguin Watch volunteers was held, and the winner got to go to the Antarctic. And you could see the winner of that contest in that lower right jumping into the Antarctic seas. And I'm not sure all of our volunteers share that level of enthusiasm, but the number one reason that volunteers do participate is simply to contribute to scientific progress. Runner-up reasons are that they're fascinated in a project or that it's just plain fun. We have over 1.5 million registered volunteers across 237 countries, ranging in age from 5 to 95 years old. It's a wonderfully diverse group, all making real contributions to science. Snapshot Serengeti is another one of my personal favorites. Volunteers help classify images from hundreds of camera traps in Serengeti National Park, providing a powerful new window into Africa's most elusive wildlife species. It was launched in 2012 and it's been incredibly successful. In the first 3 days alone, there were over 1 million classifications. They processed an 18-month backlog of images. And there's a related publication that showed that the crowd is as good as experts in consensus scenarios, or were 97% accurate compared to the 98% accuracy of experts in other scenarios. Again, the crowd gets it right. And personally, I now know the difference between a hartebeest and a wildebeest, and this project is just plain fun. To elaborate more on what I mean by consensus, Snapshot Serengeti has 25 volunteers classify an image before retiring it, unless the first 5 say it's blank or 10 agree, thereby reaching a consensus. Now, this image is pretty straightforward, and as you can see in the lower right, volunteers are currently all in agreement so far that there's one giraffe in this image. While this image is challenging, one volunteer thinks there are 4 wildebeest, another 3 rhinoceroses, one wildebeest, and others buffalo. With certain images, it's just not possible to get consensus, in which case 25 people will classify the image before it's retired. Now, even experts can't agree on these images, and though these images are the minority, most, or over 70% of images, are retired with the consensus before getting to the 25 classification maximum. So now we'll focus on some transcription projects, starting with Annotate. Annotate is in collaboration with the Tate Museums and Archives, and it's a Museums of the Web top prize winner. In addition to creating art, many artists wrote diaries and letters and made sketchbooks that contain rich details about their lives and creative processes. Volunteers transcribe these documents from the Tate collection and reveal the secret lives of artists. I like to have the artists' works open in one window and classify in another window. It gives a whole new appreciation for the art and the artists themselves. For documents such as this, OCR doesn't work, which is why we need to transcribe them. Transcription can be quite challenging. It's not as straightforward as clicking on a penguin, but we try to make it as straightforward and simple as possible. For Annotate, we utilize a transcription method I'm going to refer to as line by line. And we don't ask volunteers to transcribe an entire page. We do not ask them to even necessarily transcribe an entire sentence. We simply ask them to transcribe one visual line at a time that they feel that they can do in confidence. This creates quality collective efforts. Each line's XY coordinates and related transcription is then compared with an algorithm, creating hopefully consensus and vastly reducing the need for experts. To date, the average rate of accuracy for a line transcribed by multiple people on Annotate is 95%. This rate of accuracy is in line with estimates on OCR accuracy, which are 94% for grayscale and 97% for bitonal. So accuracy in line with OCR on documents that can't use OCR. Again, showing that the crowd gets it right. In collaboration with the Folger Shakespeare Library here in Washington, D.C., another transcription project that we love is Shakespeare's World. Volunteers transcribe handwritten documents by Shakespeare's contemporaries and help us understand his amazing life and times. It has a similar line-by-line process, but there's added complexity for the type of historical documents. Now, what we've learned with this project as well as others is that if you have a great UI for volunteers, that they can accomplish complex and difficult transcription. Again, it helps to break the transcription process down to an approachable level. So documents are divided between recipes and letters, and for those interested in delicious dishes or juicy gossip from Shakespeare's time, I personally enjoy the recipes. They can be tough, but it's fascinating. And there's also a wonderful blog with Shakespeare's World, just like many of our projects, that gives updates and shares great stories from the project. The next transcription project is Decoding the Civil War. You can witness the United States Civil War by transcribing and deciphering messages and codes from the United States military telegraph, including, there's one telegraph from Abraham Lincoln to Mary Todd 2 weeks before his death, updating her on the war after a meeting with General Grant. It's incredibly interesting. And then there's other telegraphs requesting whiskey or clean underwear. It runs the gamut, and it's a fascinating perspective into the people's lives of this remarkable time in our country's history. Now, as you hopefully can see in the animation, this is a variation on the method I previously mentioned. Here, volunteers underline a line and then transcribe. We ask volunteers to do an entire telegraph before proceeding. An additional method that we worked on years ago in collaboration with the New York Public Library is Scribe. The method of Scribe is that one volunteer marks the document structure, and then the same volunteer or a different volunteer can do the work of transcribing. There's also a verification process. Scribe is open source like everything we do is. I'd encourage you, if you want to do a transcription project on your own outside of the universe, check out Scribe. It might be a very useful tool for you. There's also a method that the Smithsonian uses where one volunteer might transcribe, a different volunteer would review, and then an expert would review, and there's feedback all along that cycle. And there's no right or wrong method. The best method depends on the project. So coming back to Decoding the Civil War, this was entirely built, this was recently launched and built within our project builder. Now, a little over a year ago, we launched the project builder. It's an easy-to-use, browser-based interface to create a project, and it's incredible. We're really proud of it. Right now, anyone can build their own project for free in hours. Go to zooniverse.org, click Build a Project, and you're on your way. It's that simple. There's an overview online. I'm going to give an overview, but there's a detailed tutorial, and there are message boards online if you'd like to try it yourself. So this is a screenshot from within the project builder. Don't worry about the details shown. My intent is just to give you a general feel for the interface. In the far left menu from top to bottom, you have a project what we refer to as a project section, a workflows section, and a subject set sections. I'll start with subject sets. It's likely your collection, typically in our case images, though we're experimenting with video. You can upload your subjects into the project builder, or we do support externally hosted images. You can include metadata, like your internal IDs and other info, which can either be shown or hidden from volunteers. And once you have your subject set into the project builder, you could then create what we refer to as a workflow. It's the sequence of tasks that you ask volunteers to do. And we have many types of tasks, including text tasks, especially useful for transcription projects, a drawing task, and drop-down tasks. Some are behind an experimental flag, so in which case ask and we'll enable it for you. Also within the project, or in the workflow editor, you set the retirement for a subject, which is how many times it's classified before it's no longer shown to volunteers. So once you have a subject set in a workflow, you've completed the core of the project. Now here we see what a volunteer sees while classifying within the Notes from Nature project. Notes from Nature is where volunteers transcribe specimen labels that we recently relaunched after rebuilding within the project builder. I work closely with this project. It's been a wonderful experience. It has an incredible research team. And what you can see here are 2 text tasks where a volunteer can type the specimen collector name and number, and then 3 drop-down tasks to enter the month, day, and year, all within what we refer to as a combo task. And this is an example of what you can build and what a volunteer would then see. Within the project builder, you can also add other collaborators or people to help you. You can add content for your project landing page. You can create a team page, a research page to give more detail about what you're looking to accomplish. You can create tutorials, field guides, and mini courses to help volunteers classify. You can set up your talk where the incredible serendipity I mentioned earlier happens. And you can export aspects of your project, including volunteer classifications, either on day 1, months in, or whenever. There's a review process to be featured on the main page, but as soon as you build your project, you can share a link with it to anyone. A successful project articulates their purpose well, has workflows that are as straightforward and simple as possible, detailed help for volunteers, and an active research team on talk, which it helps significantly. So the Zooniverse is expanding at an exhilarating rate with exciting challenges ahead, especially with transcription projects, which we'd love to collaborate with you on. We're constantly working with machine learning experts to further their research, as well as make sure we're not wasting our volunteers' precious time. And we're actively improving the Zooniverse on mobile. We're open source. Check us out on GitHub. The Zooniverse works, and we want you to join us. Help us accomplish science otherwise thought impossible. Unlock your data or someone else's. We won't make you jump in the Antarctic seas, but you may end up with a galactic-sized gas cloud named after you. And on a final note, we're also thrilled to announce 2 upcoming open calls for partners with text or audio transcription projects needing custom tools or interface. It's hard to express how excited we are about this. These open calls are made possible by new funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services for a 3-year effort to better support this community. As part of this effort, we will take the lessons learned through these new custom-built projects to improve the tools that we offer to all through the project builder. So thank you for your time today.
So we're going to have time for questions. So Liz and Ricky, if you want to join us up here. During this, we have about 15 minutes for questions. So, and if you have a question, you're in the audience, raise your hand, and we'll have volunteers with mics that will find you. I see we have one hand raised in the back already. Also on Twitter, if you are following along, you can tweet your questions using the hashtag #AsData. So again, we'll take questions for about 15 minutes. I'm going to mention this quickly because we might, because we'll just break for lunch right after. We're going to break until 1:30 after the question round. And just a reminder, you'll have to, if you leave the building, you have to pass through security to get back in. So come back, plan for that if you leave the building. If you don't want to leave the building, you can go to our main cafeteria in the Madison building via some tunnels. And if you meet by the information desk, then a Library of Congress staff will help you go through those tunnels. So just that quick piece before we start. Do we have somebody with a microphone in the back here? Yep, please go ahead. You want to start back here?
Hello, I'm Hollis Gentry, and I'm from the Smithsonian Libraries, the Smithsonian Transcription Center, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. We launched recently a transcription project transcribing the Freedmen's Bureau records, a Reconstruction era group of federal documents, and we launched it just a little over a month ago. My question to the last speaker is, what kind of incentives do you offer to your volunteers to continue with the process? How do you deal with some of the difficulties or the challenges with the transcription? What kind of a system do you have to keep them going?
Our mics, yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the transcription is challenging, so it's difficult to keep volunteers engaged. We have found that talk and the community that builds around these projects is really the strongest way to keep people engaged, and that not only helps people ask questions or get through the difficult challenges that might be related to that specific transcription project, but it also helps people explore interesting ideas that they may have, because usually the people who are getting involved in these transcription projects they're interested in the material, of course, and they may have, they come to it with interesting ideas or ways, perspectives, and when you have people sharing this together through our forum talk, it just builds on itself, and that's what keeps people engaged, I think, to the highest degree. We don't have any other, occasionally our research team might have like prizes or giveaways or whatnot, but that's really not the core of it. In all honesty, one of the smaller points was like the people participate and continue to participate just because they want to further the purpose of the project. So it's really a lot of, our volunteers are primarily motivated by their altruism. So, and they get kind of hooked into it. And once they get a little practice transcribing, they often continue to. Hope that answers.
Great. Do we have another question here? Right here? Yep, go ahead.
This question is also for the last speaker. For the tools that you mentioned, and I'm actually really interested in your audio tool that I think is going to come out. Are you limited to what language you can apply this to? Like if I have a collection in, say, Czech, could that work on that?
Well, so I'd have to check exactly. Well, so I'm kind of just thinking out loud here. We could build like a UI that could support that. That would be a custom. Currently, I'm not sure if we have that capability, but that would be a custom project that is, potentially feasible. We have lots of plans, including internationalization. So if we were to incorporate that on like a global site level, it might also complement a specific project or collection. And you said in Czech? Yeah. So, I don't think we'd be able to, support that today, but the technological barriers I don't seem too large. That's the wonderful thing about the recent funding is we can explore these types of challenges that much more easily now going forward. So I'd have to check to give you a specific direct answer of what we can do today, but if we can't, we hope to in the future.
We have a couple questions down here.
Hi, I also am interested in the project of the last speaker, and I'm coming at it from a peculiar angle, which is that I've spent some time as a volunteer in senior living residences, and one of the issues there is that everybody is limited in what they can do. So some of the projects that have been very successful in that environment till now have been seniors doing English language teaching using Skype with students from around the world, and that's super successful, and I can imagine that some version of this could apply in that environment as well. But I'm just thinking, is there a possibility that there could be, let's say, a simpler interface overlaid on what you have now so that people who have a lot of time on their hands but limited abilities could be effective and useful and have some productive activity in their own lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And the projects really run there's a wide range of difficulty in our projects. Some currently up there right now. And actually, I guess I should be embarrassed to admit this, but I'm not. My favorites, like the Penguin Watch and Snapshot Serengeti, are very approachable. And while some certainly are more complicated, like some of the astronomy projects, some of the transcription projects, there are some that I think would be very accessible to, like the people that you're working with. And sometimes we will, we do a lot of educational outreach too, so we do try to consider making the projects accessible to as many people as we can. But that's an interesting area or opportunity. I'm not sure if we've fully considered, but I would think right now there actually would be some projects that might be that might apply.
Another question here? Oh, here, down here first.
Hi. I work for a data storage company, so often we think about how you're going to store all of that stuff. So all of you store mountains of data, right? You're all working with that all the time. So my question would be, how do you possibly store all of that? And then how long do you store it? And then how is it similar or different for each of you, because you have such different projects in a lot of ways?
So for our project, at this point, we have a manageable amount of data because we are maintaining the images after we've processed them, and then the feature data sets. I'm at an institution that has both a data repository, and the expectation that the institution will be the place that manages that data. So, and we have a number of systems in place, and so we work with Deepin as one example. So we'll have to see, and since our needs are not necessarily for, it's not preservation forever, we're looking at managing the data for reproducibility over X number of years, and I think our plan at this point is 5 years. So since we are not the collectors of the original images and we don't need to maintain the digital images, it's not to say that we may not run into some challenges, but I feel like institutionally we're in a pretty good place for that.
Well, with me it's the same. I do have copies of some of the photos that I study, and I believe in locks. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. So I put them in multiple hard drives. I also have copies that I use for just basic processing and work. So I have a digital file that's better resolution and more preservation copies. So I teach Introduction to Digital Curation, so I kind of have to follow what I teach, which is like the OAIS model of doing things. But I'm not. I definitely don't have collections at the level of a repository that would make large corpora of materials such a daunting task for me.
And we actually also, we're not necessarily responsible for maintaining the images or the collections over time. Someone who's going to create a project, they're really the ones who are responsible for, over the long term, maintaining and storing and organizing those in our case, often images. But just from like a technical standpoint, I mean, we use AWS, the Amazon Web Services, to host a lot of our information. So I guess we're in the cloud for the most part. And actually I'm a front-end developer, so I'm somewhat ignorant in terms of the entire back-end picture or ops picture, but I think, yeah, essentially sounds like we're actually all kind of somewhat similar.
All right, so I think we have time for one more question. We have one up here in the back.
Hi, this question is for Ricky. Ricky, I was very intrigued by your grid to analyze the virtual reunification, and I wonder if the provenential, geographical, et cetera, I wonder if these have been used for indigenous collections, or is it typically for anthropological fieldwork?
So the model that I did was primarily to explain the complexity of virtual reunification for mainly people who are in charge of collections, because I do tell them that if you are trying to capture the whole, you need to have some. At this point, I don't think it's possible. So consider this as a way to analyze the problem for yourself, and create representations that would somewhat allow the representation of these different aspects of dispersion. Now, so this is mainly for ethnographic collections that I've seen. A project that's recently funded by IMLS called Valuing Our Scans, and this goes to communities, looking at the impact of digitized collections once they're downloaded, because we are quite good at doing research on how do we discoverability, when you search for something, how quickly can you get at something that you're looking for, but what happens once the image is taken by a person into their homes? What happens? Do they keep it? Do they use it for something else? What's the impact of this? So I'm taking that model more to inform my research on that project. So yeah, so this is an ongoing conversation, if I would put it that way. So I'm definitely learning a lot as I move on.
Okay, thank you. So we'll have to break here for lunch. Again, meet back here at 1:30 and leave time for security. Give our speakers a hand.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.